G'day guys, welcome to another episode of COVID Convos, where we have real conversations with real people about what wellbeing looks like in a pandemic. My name's Griggsy, and I'm here with Kesh, a purple Kesh today. How are you, mate?
I'm getting more and more profesh as we go along, my friend. Yeah, but I'm doing all right.
Well, the purple background makes up for no Simon today. It's given me a bit of something to get going in the morning. Although something that's got me even more excited is to chat with our guest today, and that's Lisa Baker. How are you, Lisa?
I'm good, thank you. Feeling good.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to start by just giving our guests a little bit of a background on who you are, so we can familiarise ourselves with you?
Sure. Well, I guess like a lot of people, I wear many hats. Primarily, and to my absolute core, I'm an early childhood educator. So I'm a kindergarten teacher and have been for over 30 years. So on any given day, you'll find me up to my armpits in 3-year-olds. And I'm pretty short, so they do come up to my armpits. So I guess that's the core of me. But in recent years, I've moved into other areas as well. I recently undertook the MAPP, the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology at Melbourne Uni. So I now use that in my life and in my work too. I'm a senior associate with the Positivity Institute in Sydney with Dr. Susie Green, so some occasional work there. I'm also working with the wellbeing, literacy and language research stream at the Centre for Positive Psychology at Melbourne Uni. And also through the Centre for Positive Psychology, I'm a marker and a mentor into the MAPP program as well. So those things keep my brain ticking along. As well as being a teacher, I'm also a learner. I'm studying at the moment through Melbourne Uni, studying education, research, design and methodology with a view to move to a PhD. So a lot of those things keep me busy. And when I'm not busy doing those things, I'm a wife and a mother, and I've got 2 beautiful Burmese cats. So that pretty much covers me.
Wow, that is a very, very full basket that you've got there, Lisa. Can I say?
Cats keep me very busy.
Well, I was going to say, as somebody with 2 young children, I take my hats off, or take my hat off, just one, don't have that many, to you and all the early childhood educators, because I think a lot of parents right now are probably realising how hard it is. Well, I've always realised how hard it was, because you just walk into childcare or an early learning centre and you see the sort of the work that's being done, and you just think, I personally, I teach, but I could not work with young children with the compassion and the energy that so many people do. So I take my hat off to you and to all the people who work in that industry. And I know that industry is being, well, it's an interesting place right now in Australia, isn't it? So I guess my first question is, how are you seeing the whole situation, the COVID situation, relating to, you don't need to just talk about early childhood educators, but relating to your life?
Well, I guess it is affecting both areas of my life, like everybody else, my work life and my personal life. I think probably the work life at the moment it's quite unsure. We are, unlike schools, we haven't been moved to online learning. So in early childhood education, so that's working with children from 0 to 6, the centres are still open. Early childhood educators have been declared essential workers. So we are still going in to work directly with children. So there's a lot of areas to be covered in that regards. How do we distance from children when that goes so against the philosophy and the very nature of early childhood education, and that's to be close and working alongside and with children. There's a lot of conversation in the sector about how do we make that happen. Personally, for me, we have decided to run a dual learning program. So the parents who wish to bring their children in will be offering a physical face-to-face program. and the parents who wish to have their children stay at home, we're offering an online learning platform, and that's for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. So my week now, whereas before I would be in with the children all day, I'm now in with some children, 5 children one day, and then the next day working from home online with the other 15 children whose parents have decided to stay home. So it's a really interesting space, because we're partly there and partly not there, and trying to do 2 things at once, and just trying to do our best with our ultimate underlying intention of keeping that connection with the children, even if it's not in a physical sense, if it's a digital connection, but just really trying to keep those bonds and relationships strong, so that when this is over and we can come back to be together physically, we can do so.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time. I mean, we've spoken about it a lot because we're over here in Belgium, and the childcare and the school that my daughter was going to, they're both shut. So we've talked about like what will happen when we do go back to Australia. Will it be open? How many months will we be with the kids? Because there's obviously, beyond the enjoyment of spending time with your kids, there are a lot of logistical issues that start to come up for a lot of parents. I guess this question's more for people who are outside of Australia, but what is the current ruling? Is it that people are allowed to go if they want to, or is it only if they're in emergency services? What's the situation there?
So in Australia, well, it's state by state, obviously. The states have their own ability to make rulings. So I'm in Victoria, and in the education sector in Victoria, schools for the whole term have moved online. Most universities have moved online too, I think. But early childhood, early education is operated by different government departments than primary school and secondary school, and they haven't been closed. So they're, as I said, declared as essential workers, and so we are staying open. And although that families are encouraged to stay at home if they can stay at home, and to work from home if they can work from home, we will stay open and available to parents who need that care and education for children. If, for example, they are in emergency services or health workers or any work really. So we're there for them in that way. And I guess I kind of view it, it's a bit like the time where you go, it's not what the country can do for me, it's what can I do for my country. And I feel as an early childhood educator, I can be there. I can be there for children who might be vulnerable and be better in an early childhood service than being at home, or being in an early childhood service so their parents can go and be in an ER. I just feel it's something that I can do in a small way to contribute to how we all move through this. But it is interesting you were talking about being a parent at home. I think we're asking so much of parents at the moment. We're asking you to be a parent, to be a teacher, and also to be an employee all at once from the same space. And I don't know how parents are doing that. My children are 18 and 20, so I don't have to entertain them. But for people who are trying to work from home, supervise online learning for their children, and just find some time for themselves, I think it's a really, really tricky time.
Lisa, I'm curious, because you obviously wear many, many hats, and I can imagine that that's coming in handy right now. What are you drawing upon? What out of all of the things that you're involved in seems to be making sense or helping the most at the moment?
I think for me personally, mindfulness is a big part of my day and my week, and not so much the formal seated practice, or although I do that meditation style every day. It's more about keeping my mind in the here and now. It's very easy to start worrying about what might be going to happen, and for my mind to end up in next week or next month or next year. and also for my mind to go back and ruminate over what's happened before. I wish I'd known this, I wish I'd done that. So for me, being present, being where I am and using that skill that I'm working on to keep my mind in this space, in the present, non-judgmentally and on purpose. So I think that's something that really contributes to my well-being, is not letting those monkeys in my mind go swinging from tree to tree and take me to places I don't need to go. So being grounded in that way is really important for me personally.
I'm curious.
That's sorry, Kesh, go for it, mate. Oh, I was going to say that's right now, Lisa. My you've just described my mind. It's like the Jungle Book. I mean, there's monkeys going all over the joint.
Yeah.
So it's a good reminder, because I think part of you needs to be thinking a little bit about the future, but the idea of what you're saying is that's a conscious decision. It's not just you can really get sucked into that mode of just constantly like slipping into what's going to happen here, what's going to happen here. Sorry, Kesh, I did cut you off, mate. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that, because exactly the same sort of thing. I have noticed in my own brain that the monkeys are a little bit wilder than usual, and I've been giving them time to run around. So, besides seated practice, going on walks, and on the walks having something that I'm focusing on, but letting the brain go and noticing that, and then bringing it back. I'm wondering, Lise, if you have any particular tools or tricks that you use to bring the mind back, or help you focus on right now?
I think it's probably just a skill that I'm developing. I do use the breath. That's my most common anchor, that I will bring myself back into my body physically with my breath. In regards to what the tips are, I think it's about learning to recognise in yourself when those monkeys have taken you off somewhere else, and just bringing them back, just persistence, bringing them back, going, okay, I actually don't have to think about that now. Come back to where I am, be in this moment. And I'm also asking myself the question, is this in my control? Because there are a lot of things that I do worry about that really ultimately are not in my control. So I just ask myself, is that in my control? And if it's not, I can't really spend time worrying about that. So if it's not in my control, I try to not think about it, and also just asking myself, is this helping me or is this harming me? Because you said sometimes, Kesh, you do let your mind wander off, and that's great. We do need to let our minds run around sometimes, and sometimes that does help us. We come up with some really creative ideas and some alternate solutions, and some of that daydreaming can actually be quite lovely, and that's helpful. But asking yourself, is this helping me or is this harming me? Because often we do go off on these thought tangents that really can be quite harmful.
Lisa, I'm interested about your work with combining that wellbeing approach to early learning, because I know it's become very mainstream in primary and secondary schools now in Australia, or more mainstream, I should say. What are the things that you've sort of discovered about early learning that may be able to be used now by parents, I guess, at home? Any strategies that maybe you can suggest? I'm personally very interested in this question.
It is interesting because Australia has really taken up positive education, the application of positive psychology to education. Australia's a big front runner in that regard. But still, in early education, it's not so taken up. Some of the research I've done looking at how it's been utilised in early childhood has shown that even though there's lots of applicable ways and lots of synergies, that it's not really being taken up. So we've just sort of carved a bit of our own path in regards to how we can apply positive education, positive psychology to early childhood. I think one of the perhaps easiest lenses to look through is the idea of strengths. Particularly for parents, it's very easy for us to catch our children being bad. We need to try and catch our children being good. And it's very easy to focus on what they can't do or shouldn't be doing, but try and focus on what they can do and talk about their strengths and look at what they're doing through their strengths. For example, I've got a child at the moment who particularly loves to build buildings, but then he wants to crash them down all the time. And the first approach is to say, stop crashing the building down, but looking at him through his strengths. He's a real engineer and really creative, and he is just as engaged by the sounds and the physical process of the deconstruction as the construction. So it's looking at your children and going, okay, what you're doing right now is pushing my buttons or annoying me, but what actual strengths are you showing me now? Are you showing me your strength in creativity, or in kindness, or in bravery? So it's looking at the children through the length of their strengths, and we do that a lot in our classrooms, and we use character strengths, but we call them our superpowers. It's looking at what superpowers does your child have, and are they using them for good or for evil?
Lise, I'm curious, because you said that you were like looking into doing a PhD, and people that are looking into doing a PhD generally have a question that they want answered. What's inspiring that? What are you interested in? And has that changed with COVID, or do you think that it's even more applicable now?
Well, first question first. I'm interested in wellbeing literacy. So that's part of the research stream I'm with, and that's the work of Professor Lindsay Odes. And it's about the mindful use of language for and about wellbeing. So it's a new, well, not new, it's bringing together the theories of literacy and of wellbeing, but posing it as we're looking at how and why people use their everyday language in their everyday lives, and how they can leverage that for their own wellbeing. So because it's quite a new area, it's certainly not applied in early childhood yet, perhaps not applied intentionally. There's lots of ways that early childhood educators are very naturally helping children build their comprehension and their composition of language to build wellbeing. But I guess for me, my question is, how does wellbeing literacy look in early childhood? What are early childhood educators' conceptualizations of wellbeing literacy? How can we use that to build capability in young children? What are we already doing that is wellbeing literacy that we perhaps haven't necessarily identified? So it's a big piece, and my research question is still quite big, and it's a matter of perhaps narrowing that down. But it's about the conceptualization of wellbeing literacy in early childhood.
I really am intrigued by this idea, because I think it is so fundamentally important. I'm not hiding it. My past is a bit checkered, and I honestly didn't believe that I had any redeeming qualities whatsoever. Like, if someone asked me what my strengths were, like, I had no response. It was, I couldn't give them an answer. And then I did the VIA, and I remember what a different experience that was, knowing that the language of 24 strengths, and even that I had some that were higher than others, was just a life-changing moment in the way that I approached the world. Being able to call out my partner's strengths, so my partner is a little bit assertive, and sometimes that can become across as blunt, but it's courage. And she always has the courage to say what she thinks and to do the right thing, even if it means giving a cost to people. But without that language, people can't see that strength. And I think that it's so important, because it changes the way that you look at the world. It changes what you're able to see, it changes what you're able to pick up on, right? And then you're able to act on it.
We are like fish in water. Fish don't know they're in water. We don't realise we're in language. We are swimming in language all of the time, and it shapes our reality and it forms our relationships, and it can be a really important lever for our well-being, and a lot of people perhaps don't realise that, the power of words. We think of improving our well-being through physical activity, or perhaps mindfulness, managing our energy and our diet and our sleep and all those sort of things. But being really conscious about our language, the power of our words is
I mean,
has
one
a
of the
possibility to
biggest,
shape our well-being.
sorry, Lisa, one of the biggest key examples right now is the language around social distancing versus physical distancing. Like, what an amazing example of the importance of language for well-being and the consequences of getting it wrong.
Yes, and I've had quite a few posts on LinkedIn about this, where I've been pushing for physical distancing and social connection, not social distancing, because that's so wrong. That's the last thing we need. We don't need social isolation at this point in time. We need social connection. And I think there is a lot of language around at the moment that is affecting people. We talk about being stuck at home. We need to just reframe that and say, I'm safe at home, and I'm not socially distanced, I'm physically distanced. And the whole war narrative is something that really bothers me at the moment too, that we're talking about people being on the front line and that we're in battle. And I don't know about you, but some of that language starts to weigh really heavily on me. And I think that's where that mindful use of language and think, hang on, how is this affecting me? Tuning into how that language is affecting me. And again, thinking, is this helping me or is this harming me? And how can we reframe some of our language for it to be more beneficial than to drag us down at this time?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Lisa. I think when we spoke to Paul over in New Zealand, he spoke about it being a home holiday or something like that, rather than a lockdown. And you can immediately feel like, oh yeah, home holiday. Like, it brings a smile to your face, versus quarantine or isolation. You're like, oh, I feel like I'm a bit in prison. So it's, on the surface, some people might be a bit skeptical about, oh, it's just words, whatever. But like, you can see that difference immediately when you actually give examples like that. So I think it's huge what you're doing, and I'd be very interested to see how you go about it, because it's so big, like you said. I guess it's a question of narrowing it down.
That'll be the job of the supervisors if someone's prepared to take me on at some point in time.
I'm sure somebody will with I mean, it's so important, such an important stage in everyone's life. I think we've worked that out. So I think I hope somebody's listening and somebody will be interested. Lisa, I'm just wondering if you've got anything that you wanted to say that we haven't yet spoken about as we're sort of winding down.
I guess the things that are important to me are those ideas of being aware of our words, aware of our language and what effect that can have on us, and also what we're hearing all the time, this repetitive narrative which can be quite negative, knowing that we have the power within ourselves to reframe that language and to reframe our thinking and to reframe what we're telling ourselves, because those repetitive thoughts and messages that we tell ourselves, they become a reality. So I guess to ask people to be a little bit mindful when there's words playing out in their head, or that they're hearing them a lot, just to lean into that feeling and go, actually, do I need to be listening to this? I dare not say, do I need to be listening to this podcast? Do I need to be listening to this news reel? Or do I need to be reading that article? Or is this person that I'm talking to or listening to maybe changing my thinking? And we do have the power to change that ourselves. The power of words, that idea that words create worlds, I think is really important.
And I want to point out to our listeners, we are not above criticism. If we're not helping you, turn us off.
Turn us off.
So we believe in the message more than our likes or shares. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. And I even felt myself, I said, we're winding down. I even felt myself like wind down as I said that. So I'm becoming more and more conscious of already just by talking about this, Lisa. So you've given me benefit, and hopefully that'll be the same for our listeners. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us, and all the best to you and your family in this interesting time.
Indeed, and to you too. Thanks, Kesh. Thanks, Gregsy.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we request that you share, like, and subscribe. And in the meantime, you stay healthy, world.